Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. I have a very important live stream to be doing today. I've been wanting to do this one for a while. I was trying to find if someone could do it with me. Unfortunately, I couldn't really. It didn't seem like I could really get anyone to really do this stream with me. So I figured, you know what? I'll just do it myself. Let me know if the mic sounds all right, though. I'm trying out a new mic, so I hope it's not too loud or too quiet. How does it sound out there? Let me see there. I think it sounds all right. So I guess we should be good on that. So what are we doing today here? So there's a video that was uploaded on the channel Planet Curious, where Phil Zuckerman, who's a sociologist, is basically arguing that the non-religious, atheists, agnostics, secularists, are better than religious individuals, specifically Christians. So I was like, interesting. So I watched it a few months ago and was just blown away by how bad it was, to say the least. And I was like, I got to respond to this, but I didn't have the time because I was doing a bunch of other streams back in February and March, and I got busy with other stuff. So finally getting around to doing this. And this is something I've been wanting to do for a while. So basically, this is a short video where the sociologist Phil Zuckerman is going to argue that non-religious people are better than religious people. So I just thought it'd be fun to go through that and show that this argument is just really not that good. So here is the video, if you guys can see that. Again, it's on Planet Curious. The title is Are Religious People More Moral Than Atheists? Here are the facts with Phil Zuckerman. So when I saw that, I was like, okay, I know where this is going. And sure enough, it's a lot of the same arguments that Phil Zuckerman has used before. A lot of this stuff I've responded to. To show you, for example, what I mean, in the description below, I'll just pull it up here. In the description below, I have a playlist that videos I've been working on for a while. I can show you this here. So here are the videos. So as you can see, a lot of what I've addressed, a lot of what Zuckerman argues has been addressed in this second video here. Is Christianity harmful? It's a lot of the same arguments. It's the same arguments he's been using year after year after year. I was like, okay, so we'll go through and address this because I think a direct response might be better than what I've done in the past, which is more of an indirect response. So that's what we're going to be going through today here. So I'll save super chats and questions to the end because there's a lot I got to cover in here. A lot of various studies that I want to go through that he cites. So it took a while to get everything together and get my notes together. So yeah, that's what we're going to be doing today. So I'll go and play this video. I got my time markers ready. And we will go from there. All right. Any questions? Great. Glad to hear there's no questions. Here we go.
Do godless people have values? Do secular people have morals? Yeah. Not only do they have them, but they have them in abundance. In fact, in many ways, atheists, agnostics, and secular humanists exhibit more compassion and more empathy than their religious peers. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
So there's what I mean. That it catches you right there in the beginning. They have more empathy. They're more moral in all these ways. If Zuckerman was just arguing, oh yeah, atheists have morals, I wouldn't have looked twice at this. I'd be like, yeah, obviously atheists can be moral people. I wouldn't deny that. But he goes a step further and he says, yeah, we're even more moral in plenty of ways. I'm like, okay, well, that's a pretty bold claim. Let's see if the data actually supports it.
My name is Phil Zuckerman. I'm a professor of sociology and secular studies at the Claremont Colleges in California. And today I'm going to be talking in part about some of the arguments I make and some of the data I go over in my book, What It Means to Be Moral, Why Religion is Not Necessary for Living an Ethical Life. As I film this right now, the Middle East is in a death spiral. Dark clouds are hovering and they're getting darker. So much suffering, so much pain, so much bloodshed. As has been the case, typically, it's the Palestinian civilians that are suffering the most. But what's interesting from my lens is that if you notice, what is the role of religion here? On the Palestinian or Muslim or Arab side, it's actually the most fervent, fanatical, fundamentalist Muslims who most devoutly believe in their truth of divinity and Allah and Muhammad and the Quran that are spearheading the most violence against their enemies, who are ramping up the conflict, ramping up the violence. Same thing on the Israeli or Jewish side. It's the most fanatical, fervent, fundamentalist, messianic Jews in the Israeli government, in the cabinet, and their supporters who are pushing the most bloodshed, who are enforcing the most atrocities on civilians. So you have these two warring sides, both believing that God or Allah is on their side fervently. And it's actually the non-religious people in both camps, the secular folks, that actually are the most reasonable, who most seek a humane resolution as soon as possible.
All right. So right then and there, we have a problem because there's an implication here, and there's no data to really support his conclusion that in this specific conflict, it's the secularists that are the most reasonable, most looking for a peaceful solution. I've known many religious people, Jews, Muslims, and Christians, that want a peaceful solution. I would like to know the data on this. And moreover, there's an implication here, which I don't think is well supported, which is that just generally, it's the secularists that are going to be the ones that are looking for a humane solution. Again, I don't think that is necessarily supported by the data all the time. There are many times when that's just not the case. So this is a book I've cited often. As you know, this is written by an atheist, even though he doesn't like to be called that because he thinks new atheists have ruined that term. This is Nathan Johnstone's book. And what he says in this, he points out Lenin wrote that the church hold on people might be broken. Here was a unique opportunity to smash the enemy. The prosecutions were the first of the regime's show trials. 8 priests and 3 laity were executed and 25 others imprisoned. The expropriation campaign continued, as did the violence and the show trials. Perhaps as many as 8,100 clergy and religious were killed in the conflict over church valuables. The early attack on the church set the tone and style of the anti-religious persecution thereafter. But its intensity fluctuated widely with the regime's constantly changing priorities. He says in November, that's in 1973, this is in Stalin's time, mass arrests of clergy and believers on charges of insurgency and sabotage were carried out, and the religious featured prominently in the closing stages of the Yezvochina. Probably butchered that. The wave of show trials conducted by Stalin's notorious Commissioner of Internal Affairs, the charges explicitly equated taking advantage of Article 124 with counter-revolution. Another wave of church closures reduced the number of Oxford houses in worship by 4,200 by 1941. So, you can make the case that in some conflicts and in some areas, it's the secularists, the non-religious, that have been more violent, more oppressive. It just really depends on who has more power. You could say that in the Palestinian conflict, yeah, it's possibly the Jews because they have power there, or it's the extremist Muslims like Hamas because they have power there. But that doesn't always transfer to other areas. And I'm not saying Zuckerman directly stated that, but it kind of was implied from my perspective. He also points out later in the book, he says, for many critics, the new atheism itself is a form of fundamentalism, like religious literalism. It seeks to establish a single authoritative route to knowledge, science, that, in devaluing alternatives as non-knowledge, creates barriers to genuine dialectical exchange. Yet the sense of being the privileged holders of the truth precedes a peculiar mixture of assurance and paranoia. So Zuckerman is saying it's the fundamentalists, the extremists in this conflict that are the most dangerous. But fundamentalism can happen in a secular setting as well. Another researcher points out this: the secular is not less violent than the religious. In fact, it is more so. It is a source of greater, more intense, more intractable violence than our religious practices, communities, and worldviews and commitments. Religion in and of itself does not promote violence any more than secularism in and of itself promotes peace. Just as some of the most horrendous militarism and violence in the history of our ever smaller world has been religiously motivated, so has some of the most grand and most successful efforts for peace and peaceful social change been religiously grounded. Similarly, the most horrific and deadly wars of the 20th century, particularly the 2 world wars, were pursued by putatively secular nation states. So the case can be made that in many ways being in a secular state can result in more violence. Slide from one of my videos, Does Christianity Cause War and Violence? Really important book, The Myth of Religious Violence, which is often cited on this. Notes that during the 16th century, a lot of the supposed religious violence that Christians are supposedly responsible for committing in the name of Christianity was actually a result of secular policies and changing of powers and stuff. So it's not this idea that it's just always the religious people that are more violent, and it's the secularists that are always going to be the most peaceful and seeking the most humane solutions. That's not really supported by the data. And thank you for the super chat. Appreciate it, Jiun Shin. Don't also forget Mao Zedong, who destroyed most of Chinese culture. Yeah, another great example. There's plenty of great examples like this. And to just say like, oh, yes, it's just going to be the secularists. And again, I don't think Zuckerman was intending for that implication, but that's kind of what I got from him when he brought up this conflict here. So I just wanted to point out that it's kind of a little bit more nuanced than that, than the implication it was getting. But all right, let's get on with this video. A lot of good examples I could go, but I don't want to spend too much time on that. I want to get to more important aspects of this video.
But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's back up for a second. As you probably know, the #1 negative stereotype people have of atheists is that they have no morals. After all, if you don't believe in a magical, invisible deity that's going to send you to heaven or hell, how can you be a good person? Well, I've spent most of my life trying to debunk that fallacy, and I'm not approaching it from a sort of abstract philosophical sense of, what is the nature of morality? What is the ontology of ethics? Where does it all come from? That's all good and fine. There's a lot of work there. But I'm interested in seeing how people actually live their lives and express their morality here and now on planet Earth. And what you'll find is that all the social science we have shows us actually on issue after issue after issue, atheists, agnostics, and other godless folks are actually more moral than you might expect, and in many cases, more moral than the strongly religious. And you can think of...
Yeah, that's the main issue we're going to be contesting. I don't think the data he uses supports that well, and I could cite a ton of data in the opposite direction, which we'll get to later. I'm going to cover a bunch of studies showing ways in which religious people appear to be more moral, but I'm not going to make the same conclusions Zuckerman is making, because I don't think that's supported by the data that he uses or that I could use in this. And I'll just show it in reverse to show you what I mean later.
Think about it, if you want, just in terms of individuals, because a lot of people forget this. When they think of moral beacons in history, they tend to think of religious people. It's understandable. When you think of the most moral person, it's often Martin Luther King, a strong Christian minister. You bet. But for every Martin Luther King, there's a strongly secular Nelson Mandela or W.E.B. Du Bois.
All right, real quick. Nelson Mandela was not an atheist or a secularist. I thought maybe at first Zuckerman misspoke, but then he brings up Mandela later. No, Mandela was a Methodist. He was a Christian. Let me just pull this up here because I was blown away by this. There's a paper on this. Mandela and the Methodists, faith, fallacy, and fact. They go through a lot of this data here, and they point out the question that many journalists and commentators were keen to answer was this: was Mandela a member of the Methodist Church? The answer is yes. Mr. Mandela regarded himself as a member of the denomination throughout his life. Okay, so Zuckerman's just wrong. He definitely was not an atheist or a secularist like Du Bois was, for example, or others are. It may have just been a slip. He may have just got his facts wrong there, but no, Mandela. I want to correct that because that's important. Mandela was most definitely a Christian. So, all right, let's move on.
Some people, if they don't think of MLK, they think of who's a morally righteous person? Gandhi. You bet. But for every spiritual Gandhi, there's a fiercely secular Nehru or Harvey Milk, for that matter. Sometimes it's Mother Teresa, sure, a strongly religious nun who devoted herself to taking care of dying orphans in India. But for every Mother Teresa, there's a Bernard Kouchner, the founder of Doctors Without Borders, which, I hate to say it, but has probably saved far more lives in the world than Mother Teresa's orphanages. And yet, where do Mandela and Du Bois and Harvey Milk and these other moral beacons, where do they get?
That's kind of a weird argument to make. I mean, why don't we compare Doctors Without Borders to the Catholic Church at large? I mean, just looking at one nun versus an entire organization, which is far more racist than what Mother Teresa had, I don't think is a fair comparison.
Their values, it's grounded in their secular humanism. And it really doesn't actually help to talk about individuals like I've been doing, because you can always find an amazing moral religious person and an amazingly moral secular person.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's why I don't think this anecdotal evidence is very useful. But I appreciate Zuckerman admitting that.
It can find scoundrels on both sides. So as a social scientist, I'm actually more interested in the bigger picture, the larger patterns, the averages, the significant correlations. So let's start big picture. If you want to talk about secular values, how about let's start with the biggie at that political realm, democracy. I mean, government by the consent of the governed. It's probably the greatest gift we've ever bequeathed ourselves. And why do I say bequeath ourselves? Because you won't find any assertion or articulation or defense of democracy in any of the great religions. You won't find it in any holy scriptures, not in the Torah, not in the Talmud, not in the Bible, not in the Quran, the Upanishads, the Adi Granth Sahib, you name it. The notion that we can rule ourselves and govern ourselves is a human value, and it's a secular value, and it's really one of the most amazing gifts we've, as I said, have bequeathed ourselves, and it doesn't come from religion. But now,
okay, before we get to that, we're starting to see some cracks in Zuckerman's arguments here. There's a lot of problems with what he said. First, he's upset there's no articulation of democracy or democratic values in holy scriptures. Well, that's not their aim. This is just confusing categories here. The religious texts are not political treatises necessarily. They're focusing on other issues like morality and theology and these kinds of things. They don't necessarily have to get into politics, but it's also more complicated than that because numerous researchers will note it's Christianity that has been very crucial for the development and spread of democratic values and reforms and political change. I mean, here are 3 great books that go into this in various details, like the Permanent Revolution, the Reformation, and the illiberal roots of liberalism, making the case that a lot of this came out of Christianity. Same with Tom Holland notes in his book Dominion, that Christianity is really responsible for inspiring and developing human rights, democratic values, principles of freedom, and a lot of modern research shows this as well. So, as I noted in my recent video, How Christianity Changed the World, Daniel Treisman notes Protestantism plays an important role in monitoring, denouncing state officials. It's associated with lower corruption, helps establish a pronounced distinction between church and state. And this goes back to St. Augustine's work, The City of God, where he really pushes forward this idea, this distinction, and it's developed out from there. Also, Roland to Salem notes that we find evidence that Protestantism is correlated with strengthening democratic politics, specifically in ensuring that basic freedoms are preserved, that political stability is guaranteed, that civil society provides the basic infrastructure for a pluralistic society to grow, and for authoritarian forces in the government to be checked and held accountable. So if you want a government that is not going to be authoritarian, that's going to be about freedom and democratic values, you want a Christian society. Christian societies tend to create those kinds of results. Robert Woodbury found that this idea of liberal democracy flows from Protestant work, specifically missionary work. Statistical analysis suggests that Protestant missions are strongly and robustly associated with democracy. In fact, missions seem to explain about half the variation in democracy outside Europe and survive dozens of controls and robustness checks. More concretely, the cumulative correlation between Protestant mission and democracy is 0.707, which is extremely high. Harrison and Huntington note Protestantism reduces corruption in part because of its association with individualistic, non-familialistic relations. Robin Greer noted, I also find that the growth rate of Protestantism is positively and significantly correlated with real GDP growth, and that the level of Protestantism is significantly related to real per capita income levels. I find overwhelmingly that Protestantism is correlated with growth and development. And it's not just Protestantism. The book I mentioned earlier notes that a lot of this also comes from Catholic teachings and Catholic movements that spread new democratic and human rights movements in Brazil, Chile, Central America, the Philippines, South Korea, Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, Ukraine, and elsewhere. So you can definitely see evidence that a lot of the democracy we have in the world today directly comes from Christianity. For Zuckerman to say, well, this is just secular, is just not accurate in an historical or scientific analysis. A lot of the democracy, the freedom, the human rights we have come out of Christianity. It's the result of Christians working with their scriptures and deducing ideas from that and how to apply it to the political realm. You get these ideas. So democracy, human rights, constitutional ideas, these are coming out of the Christian worldview. These aren't just coming from secularism. That's nonsense. You could make the case that they are compatible with secularism, but secularism is really the redheaded stepchild of Christianity. I mean, that's kind of the truth. A lot of the values we see in secularism are ideas they got from the Christian worldview, got from Christian societies. And this is the argument made by Tom Holland in Dominion. He says secularism owes its existence to the medieval papacy. Humanism derives ultimately from the claims made in the Bible, that humans are made in God's image, that the Son died equally for everyone. There's neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female. Repeatedly, like a great earthquake, Christianity has sent reverberations across the world. Why are humanists, secularists so anti-slavery? Well, Holland argues they got this from their Christian background, from their Christian values. It's not this idea they just sort of came up with them de novo. They got this from a Christian worldview. If secular humanism derives not from reason or from science, but from the distinctive course of Christianity's evolution, a course that, in the opinion of growing number in Europe and America, has left God dead, then how are its values anything more than the shadow of a corpse? What are the foundations for its morality, if not a myth? So he basically points out that a lot of what we see in this Christian worldview, or in this secular worldview, that is coming from the Christian worldview. So Zuckerman wants to say that this is purely secular, but a lot of experts have said this is something that comes out of the Christian worldview, and it's something that secularism, modern secularism, inherits. They didn't just come up with it on their own. That's not what the data shows here. And again, we see in study after study. See my video that I just uploaded like a week ago, how Christianity has changed the world. That a lot of this data on democratic values, lower political corruption, citizen empowerment is coming out of Christianity and Christians promoting their worldview and spreading their values around the world. So there's a lot more here than what meets the eye here. And I think Zuckerman has just either oversimplified it or he's just not aware of a lot of this data, unfortunately. So yeah, there's a lot of problems there. Let me get to some super chats here before we move on. He had a bunch of values on screen that I feel could be very easily biased against religious folk. Oh, Matthew, you have no idea what's coming. You need to stick around. You just wait. There's a lot more coming. It's going to be a lot of that where we just sort of assume certain values or certain democratic or left-wing policies are good. Atheists support them. Therefore, atheists are better. It's going to be a little bit of like assuming the conclusion you want. If you say women are not being elders is sexism, then Christians will inherently be determined as more sexist. Yes, you just wait, buddy. You just wait, Matthew. More is coming. He's going to be doing a lot of that kind of stuff, and we're going to push back on that. Christianity also played a key role in Korean resistance to Japanese imperialism during the brutal Japanese occupation. Look up Yu Guan-soon. Yeah, I'll look that up. That looks interesting. Sounds about right from some of the research I was reading on missionary activity in Korea. I did cite one paper on that in my video, How Christianity Changed the World. It was like the last paper I cited. What do you think of people saying you're faking your belief in God since you believe in evolution and you don't think there's a hell? Well, Crazy Fast 559, they're lying because I do believe there's a hell. I most certainly do. I made a whole video titled, Does God Send People to Hell? Where I said, yes, there's a hell and some people are going. So obviously they're not getting my views right. On the whole evolution thing, I will just push back and say, what core doctrines am I denying? I believe in the triune God. I believe the triune God created everything. Excuse me. I believe there was an actual Garden of Eden. There was an historical Adam and Eve. There was a real tree of knowledge of good and evil, a real tree of life. There was a real fall. They were exiled from the garden. Okay, so I accept everything in that story that would be consistent with core Christian doctrines. Not denying anything there. So how am I not a real Christian? And what would I get out of faking belief in this? Like, I bet I could make a lot more money if I just came out as an atheist, and that'd be sensationalist. Oh, this Christian apologist comes out as an atheist. It's all this sensationalist. How crazy. But yeah, I definitely believe. How about this? Have them watch my video, The Absurdity of Christianity, or watch my video, Why Jesus Hasn't Returned Yet. And then you tell me if you think I'm a Christian or not. All right, let's get back to the video. I'll get to some more super chats in a little bit here, because there's a lot more to go over here. But yeah, I think Zuckerman's main claim that democratic values are purely secular and not Christian, not really supported by the data.
Now let's get to actual secular people. That's really my life's work, is studying secular human beings and secular culture. And what do we find there? So we have a lot of social science on people's opinions, on people's values, ethics, morals, the positions they take on the reigning issues of the day. Most of this comes from Western democracies, but not all, some Eastern democracies as well. There's really no viable social science in any of the dictatorships because people aren't free to express what they really believe in those societies. So that most of this comes from democracies where social science is more viable. So what do we find? On issue after issue after issue, godless people take the more moral position. Let's start with the obvious, racism. Ought people who look different be treated differently? Does appearance equate with character? Of course not. And yet this has been a burden in our world for so long. People being treated differently, unjustly, people being oppressed because of their physicality. It's ridiculous. And yet, guess what? In study after study after study, we find that atheists and agnostics, particularly white atheists and agnostics, actually espouse the least racist worldviews. And the strongly religious actually, believe it or not, express the most tribalistic, ethnocentric, prejudiced, and racist worldviews.
Okay. So if you saw really quickly, he flashed on screen 3 studies. Okay. Really only one is a peer-reviewed, robust meta-analysis. The other ones are just sort of like, well, there's problems there, let's just say. Let's go to the first study, though, because I have, oh my goodness, how many times have I read this study? More times than I can count. Where is it? Let me put this on the screen. So this is the meta-analysis that I have read this study probably 6 or 7 times now. I've not only read it 6 or 7 times, I've communicated with 2 of the study authors to verify that what I found in reading the study was accurate. This study does not say, as Zuckerman implies, that secularists, atheists, agnostics are less racist than the strongly religious. That's not what it says in this study. And we can just go through to see it. Let me go right to the findings and I'll show you. So let's go down to the charts here. Okay. Where are we at? Here we go. Okay. So here we go. Religious identification, mixed bag, extrinsic, religious fundamentalism, intrinsic. Okay. So refresher, extrinsic religiosity. So extrinsic religiosity is the idea that you're religious for external reasons, social reasons. You go to church because you want to be a part of a group. You find it's helpful to be a part of a community. Maybe you just enjoy church. You're there for extrinsic reasons. Intrinsic religiosity, you're religious because you basically believe the core tenets of the faith. You really do believe Jesus rose from the dead. Look at what it finds. The less actually you are devoted to the religious ideas when you're extrinsically religious, that's correlated with racism. Okay. Intrinsic religiosity. What do we got there? Negative. Now it's in the non-significant range. To be significant with an R value, you got to have at least 0.1 or more, but it's non-significant. Christian orthodoxy, non-significant as well. Okay. Religious fundamentalism, slightly. Notice what's lacking. There's no category for atheists or non-religious here. These are the ones they're looking at here. So we're not doing a direct comparison. However, if you read a little bit more of the study, you'll note that non-religious were included in the quest category. So quest, okay? So it falls into the non-significant range. It's saying that people that identify as quest are not racist, but it's in the non-significant range. Now, quest, what does that mean? Quest is like people that are they say, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. I'm not associated with any sort of organizational religion, if that makes sense here. That's basically what quest is. Hold on, just drop the study. Here we go. Okay. Now notice what they say down here, though. So They say, suggesting that motives for religiosity were stronger in studies with primary religious participants, extrinsic religiosity and fundamentalism were more strongly associated with racism in primary religious samples than in mixed samples. Furthermore, Quest was more strongly associated with racial tolerance in religious than in mixed samples. But the effect was only significant with the fixed effects model. So when you mix Quest up with non-religious people, you actually get less racial tolerance. But if you just focus on the people that are specifically more religious in the Quest, you get more racial tolerance. So it's in the non-significant range, but it doesn't really support that idea that the non-religious are going to be the least racist. That study is not saying this at all. More, if you go down to the conclusion, real quick, it says, we find no relationship between the endorsement of religious doctrine, specifically the Christian faith, and racial prejudice. So this isn't coming from religiosity, racism. The categories that are racist is religious fundamentalism, but as we noted in Nathan Johnstone, you can have fundamentalism in secularism. You can have fundamentalism completely divorced from religion, and extrinsic religiosity. So most likely, where is racism going to be? It's going to be when you're not being religious, like in terms of intrinsic religiosity or holding to Christian orthodoxy. It tends to happen when you move away from that idea, not when you get more into your religious beliefs and you become intrinsically religious. So again, I have read this study probably 6 or 7 times now. I don't know why Zuckerman keeps citing this. He cited it in articles before. I don't see the evidence here. It's saying that religious people are more racist than that religious people are more racist than the non-religious. That's not really what the study is getting at. There's no explicit comparison. The only thing you can do is that in the Quest, non-religious were included in that sample, and then when they were excluded, there was more racial tolerance. So I don't know why he thinks this study supports his view. This is not really what the study is saying. But he cited 2 other studies, right? Well, let's pull those up here. They're actually not studies. They're articles. So the first one, as you saw on screen, was this article. Now, when you start reading it, things get a little like, wait a minute, what's going on here? So for more than 2 decades, I've studied the attitudes of religious affiliated Americans across the country, and year after year, in question after question in public opinion polls, a clear pattern has emerged. White Christians are consistently more likely than whites who are religiously unaffiliated to deny the existence of structural racism. Okay. Now we've got a category issue. It's not racism, it's structural racism. That is a politically loaded term because a lot of the people that are going to deny structural racism are not going to deny it because they're racist. They're denying it for political reasons, not religious reasons. Now, I also went and got this guy's book because I was like, let me see what he is talking about in here. So let me pull this up here. The book is called White Too Long, and I went to his racism index to see what type of questions people were asking. The first question. So this is it says, do you see monuments to Confederate soldiers more symbols of Southern pride or more of symbols of racism? And if you say symbols of Southern pride, you're more likely to support structural racism. You guys kind of see a problem with that? Some people may actually believe that it's just a symbol of pride and not racism. That's not evidence of racism among the religious. That's evidence of historical differences, different understanding of history, different understanding of politics. Notice what he says. Generations of slavery and discrimination have created conditions that make it difficult for blacks to work on the way to the lower class. There's evidence to support that for sure. And if some people denies that, that's not necessarily evidence of racism. That's just evidence that they don't know the history well. Okay. Another question. Irish, Italians, Jews, and many other minorities overcame prejudice and worked their way up. Blacks should do the same without any special favors. Okay. This, again, is more of a political question. If you're a libertarian, for example, if you're a left-leaning libertarian, you're more likely to say yes because you don't trust that the government can really help people. A lot of the arguments from conservatives is not that blacks don't need help getting out of poverty or bad situations, is that they don't think the government is fit to do that. They think there's other organizations who do better at that. But apparently if you say, no, or you say that, they don't need any help from like government officials, that means you're in favor of racism. I mean, there's a lot of these questions are loaded is what I would say. And there's a lot of assumptions. There's a lot of conjectures being made from them. So, professional athletes should be required to stand during the national anthem in sporting events. How is saying yes to that evidence of structural racism? This is something Bill Maher is even argued for, and he's an atheist and a liberal, and he says that's not a political issue, that's not a race issue, that's just an American issue. Of course, you should stand for that. So, a lot of loaded issues in this, and this is the same thing that was in the third article that Zuckerman cited. I can go to that really quickly. I'm not going to spend too much time on that, just to save on time here, but it's the same thing. It's just arguing that secular Americans are more in favor of a liberal understanding of how structural racism works. But I mean, like, you could push back on that from a right-leaning perspective. Let me cite an article here. Colleges expand segregated graduation events. Okay, if you're left, you're more likely to be in favor of this, even though that's going back to segregation rules. There's another article by The Hill, which says, will progressives confront left-wing anti-Semitism? We're seeing a rise of anti-Semitism on the left. That needs to be dealt with. So I think a lot of the questions in those articles that Zuckerman cited were loaded in looking at structural racism and just assuming a left-wing outlook is superior, less racist, and if you don't support left-wing policies, you're a racist. I think that's a conjecture. That's not really the truth. There's a lot more nuance in there. There's a lot more complexity in there. Again, if you think that everyone should stand for the national anthem, that doesn't mean you're racist or in favor of structural racism. That's a huge conjecture. I don't think those researchers have really well supported that kind of assumption. So a lot of loaded questions, a lot of problems with that. And again, the real main study is the one on racism, the meta-analysis I cited first, which is really the one that I would say is the strongest case. The title of that is Why We Don't Practice What We Preach, a meta-analytical review of religious racism. But they don't find evidence that this is coming from Christianity or is associated with intrinsic religiosity or Christian orthodoxy. It's associated with extrinsic religiosity, which again is not really Christian. If you look at the actual definition of what extrinsic orientation is, you could be an atheist and be extrinsically religious because you don't have to hold to the core tenets of Christianity. You can basically just be extrinsically religious. In fact, in the church I grew up with, there was a guy there that was agnostic, but he liked going to church and he liked his family going to church and being raised religious. He was extrinsically religious, but an atheist. So that's not a really good study to use when it comes to this, because that's not really supporting the idea that we see that Zuckerman is sort of just giving a surface level analysis that if you're non-religious, you're less racist. If you're more strongly religious, you're more racist. That's not what the data shows, guys. So yeah, problems there already on the rise there, but there's more to come. Let me do the next section and I'll take a break and get to some super chats because there's a bunch coming in here. I don't want to get behind on them. So let's do the next section first here because there's a lot of stuff I want to say on this.
Related to the race issue, sex and gender, men and women. Talk about a division throughout history where patriarchal norms and values have hindered the equal development of our human species. Should men and women have equal rights to pursue whatever interests they have and goals they have and careers they seek? Of course. And yet what do we find? In study after study after study, atheists and agnostics and secular humanists are far more likely to support women's equal opportunities and equal rights than the strongly religious. No surprise that if you look at the United Nations Human Development Index, what societies are the best for women in terms of their living standards, their career opportunities, their political engagement, the most secular democracies on planet Earth.
They would also be the countries that came out of Christian societies, and Tom Holland would like a word on that, showing that a lot of them are just still borrowing Christian values. Let's wait a few generations before we can actually call them entirely divorced from their Christian heritage, before you can really say, yes, they're purely secular. I think that's jumping the gun there. And there's still a large percentage of Christians in these countries. But all right, let's talk about this, because I think this section on sexism is probably Zuckerman's strongest case. However, there's still problems here. So he brought up 3 studies. He brought up 3. Let me pull up the first one, because actually I'm going to go in reverse order, because I think we need to talk about, that's going to be more related to what he's actually arguing for. So let me get this up here. Where is that one? I have got so many PDFs open on my system, guys. Okay, so it's 119. Let me pull that up. 119. Here we are. So this was the third one he had cited. This is the third one, the one that was at the bottom. So this is amnesty, benevolent sexism in religion connected through values. Now, this has a pretty small sample size. I think it's got roughly about 100 to 200 participants in Poland, and just randomly selected participants on like a train, which not that good. However, if you go down to the results, they're kind of interesting. They don't actually show this idea. That's method. Oh, what they basically found in the study, guys, is that they found they didn't find evidence of hostile sexism among religious individuals. So they split sexism between benevolent sexism, hostile sexism. No evidence of hostile sexism. What they actually found, though, is that they found evidence of benevolent sexism among women, but not the religious men. So here we go. So in order to test hypothesis, we found the following procedures described by Preacher Hayes. Among women, the indirect effect of religiosity on benevolent sexism via values was positive and significant for conservatism. So here's what they basically found. For both genders, religiosity was unrelated to hostile sexism. Moreover, age was not a significant predictor of sexism in either of the equivalents. Now here, the results were split here, but here's what they found. Although all models reached significance, religiosity was a significant predictor of benevolent sexism only among women, not among men. You can see a 0.2 versus a 0.9. This falls in the non-significant range there. So women were in favor of benevolent sexism. Religious women were, but religious men were non-significant. And also they found that this was also associated and mediated by conservatism, not necessarily religiosity there. So another issue there. But what is benevolent sexism? Well, it's defined in the study here. So benevolent attitudes towards women are reflected in the notions that women are morally superior to men. Many women have a quality of purity that few men possess and require male protection. Women should be cherished and protected by men. So apparently religious women want to be cherished and protected by men, and that's evidence of benevolent sexism. Does anyone kind of see an issue here or red flags coming up? In the study, again, they found that religious women are associated with this idea of benevolent sexism. Religious men were not. So religious men feel that women should be cherished and protected by men. And that's evidence of sexism? I have a whole problem with this whole category of benevolent sexism and what it means. I don't think it's really fair. For one thing, a lot of these studies that I've seen on benevolent sexism, in my view, and I could be wrong on this, they tend to equivocate on the idea that men and women should have equal rights, and men and women are completely the same and should be treated exactly the same. A lot of religious folk have a more traditional view. They believe men and women should have equal rights. It's hard to find someone who's not going to agree with that. However, they don't think men and women are necessarily the same, and therefore, to have equal rights, they have to be treated differently in a way. To give you an example, I, for one, am not in favor of women having to be signed up for the draft, the military draft. I don't think that would be the best thing, given that women are not as strong as men. To send them into war zones to have to fight men, I don't necessarily agree with. I think if women are going to be treated equal, they need to be respected as understood that they're just biologically not as strong as men, and therefore they need to have certain privileges, I guess you could say, that allow them to be equal, like not signing up for the draft, these kinds of things. I also think that, it's the job of a society to protect women from men invading their spaces, like women's sporting events, the whole transgender issue, or locker rooms. I think there's a problem there. A lot of conservatives agree. A lot of feminists actually agree with that. There's a split among feminists right now on that whole issue. But would I be accused of benevolent sexism? According to these studies, yes. A lot of the women are being accused of benevolent sexism, even though they want men to protect them and cherish them. Kind of some issues there I'm already starting to see. So I also want to cite some interesting things here on this act. So let me put up my slides again because I have some slides I want to show on this. Specifically, these two books here. The Case Against the Sexual Revolution by Lewis Perry and Feminism Against Progress. I've not finished the Feminism Against Progress book. I need to get back to reading that. But I think this Case Against the Sexual Revolution is very strong here. So she's actually saying that a lot of the liberal feminist ideas that have been pushed over the past few decades have actually been very harmful to women. And if you deny them, you're considered a benevolent sexist. But a lot of those values she's arguing are actually harmful, not actually helping. She says she has a quote in this book. She says chivalrous social codes that encourage male protectiveness towards women are routinely read from an egalitarian, sorry, I'm butchering that, egalitarian perspective as condescending and sexist. But the cross-culturally well-documented greater male physical strength and propensity for violence makes such codes of chivalry overwhelmingly advantageous to women, and their abolition in the name of feminism deeply unwise. Interesting point she is making here. What she's basically arguing is that in a lot of the pushes that we see from trying to say that men and women are completely the same, not that they should just have equal rights, which we all agree. Men and women should definitely have equal rights, but they should also be treated completely the same, has actually been very harming to women. And she cites examples like hookup culture. Men are more naturally able to sleep around more. This is a big subject of her book. Men are much more less emotionally attached to sex. And so it's easier for them to be in what she calls CAD mode, where you go around and sleep with multiple women and not have as much emotional baggage from that. Saying that a lot of feminists and liberals have been promoting the idea that women should do that too. And she's argued it's called a lot of depression. She cites a lot of research on this, a lot of emotional and mental problems from this. She also cites issues like pornography. She says this has been very detrimental to women because it's been wiring men's brain to favor more sexual acts that are harmful to women. I'm not going to get into the details, but I'm sure you can think. It's degrading and demeaning to women, and it's teaching women that they need to be degraded in sex, and it's not a good thing pushing that kind of idea. She also brings up prostitution, and the argument has often been that no, sex work is just work. Anyone who should be able to participate in that should be allowed. She says it's not really what happens when we legalize sex work, and she points this out that it actually ends up harming a lot of women, specifically women of the poorer classes. Why? Because when you legalize prostitution, as it is in some places around the world, the demand for more girls grows beyond the scope of the women that actually want to participate in that. So a lot of girls get coerced, manipulated into doing it, trafficked into doing it, and then they're brainwashed and told they want this kind of thing. Once you open the door for that, a lot of really bad and evil people take advantage of that. And this is happening in the pornography industry. She cites examples in her book of women who felt manipulated and coerced into doing pornography, and they regret it and they hate it now. And it's been hugely damaging to their mental health because of that. Why? Because when you legalize it and you let it go, evil people take advantage of the vulnerable, the poor. A lot of women in other countries get into prostitution, not because they want to, but because they need money. And they're coerced into doing it and that kind of thing. So it's not this idea. When you get rid of the chivalrous code, it can harm a lot of women in many ways. It doesn't actually lead to more equality. It leads to them being oppressed in various ways and sexually exploited, which is something that needs to be pointed out. So there's a case to be made that benevolent sexism can be harmful to women. There's also a case to be made that benevolent sexism, again, as it's defined, I don't even think we can call it sexism, but let's just use that term for now, is actually helpful in a lot of ways. Chivalry, for example, is, I think, an extremely important value that men should have. I mean, if I'm approaching a door and a man is coming, I just go through it. Naturally, if a woman is coming, I hold it open for her because I feel like that's just my duty as a man to be respectful to women. Is that bad? Is that evidence of sexism? Some of the study authors that write on this would say yes, unfortunately. And I don't think that's a fair thing to do. Men and women are equal, but we're not exactly the same. And this is just a biological fact. For example, men are just naturally stronger on average than women. Sure, you can find some women that are just going to be stronger than some men. Fair. But on average, men are just naturally stronger. women's brains and men's brains are different in a lot of ways. There's a lot of issues with saying that if you're sexist if you don't think men and women should be treated equal. Let's go to the next study here. So this is another study that I want to bring up here. This was the second study that Zuckerman cited here. And this one is actually not really, well, let me do the other one first here. So the other one was actually from 1987. And it's a little bit more nuanced in what it's doing here. Here we are. So I think this is it. Yeah. So this is an older study. So it's got a pretty high sample size, but it's a little old. I think the culture has sort of changed since then. And it doesn't really say that. Let me just search sexism because it covers a lot of different areas here. And it'd be easier if I just search sexism to find where I'm at because it's a long study and it covers a lot of areas. So here's the part I want to get to. So here are some of the results when it comes to sexism. First, they say it's noteworthy that no group attained a mean above 2.0, and therefore, in terms of these items on average, none of the groups is extremely sexist. So they looked at various Christian denominations. None of them are extremely sexist. They also looked at Jews, the non-religious, none of them. They found that Episcopalians are decidedly lower on sexism than any other group in this study, continue to show their opposition to sexism, even after controls for sex, social class, etc., have been taken into account. So actually, the Episcopalians were the least sexist. It does show non-religious or have low levels of sexism, but what does that mean? Does it mean you're denying equal rights? I don't think the study actually shows that. They're pointing at sexism if married women participating in the workforce or not. Now, here's the thing I want to point on that. You can agree that women should have the right to participate in the workforce, and yet you could also believe that it's actually better for them to be homemakers. A lot of women think that. There's a trad movement among women that think that. Yes, you should have equal rights, but that doesn't mean that's the best for you. So we got to make sure we don't equivocate on this. I could say, for example, let's say, not me, let's just use Joe, for example, thinks men are better and mature better if they go into the military. That does not mean Joe actually thinks men should be forced to go into the military. He thinks they should freely choose that. That doesn't mean he thinks they should force. So just saying you may think that women are better or happier or more biologically suited, psychologically suited for being homemakers or caretakers of children, that doesn't mean you think they should be denied equal rights. So there's an issue there. But again, this is a very old study. This is from the 1980s. I think the culture has really changed since then. It would be interesting to see a study like this done today to see if it was tied to more cultural aspects of the 1980s and not necessarily religiosity. We can't necessarily say that these are tied to religious aspects of individuals if it's more tied to culture. To give you an example of what I mean, atheists often bring up Stalin and they go, yes, he was a bad guy, but you can't say that was because of his atheism or his secularism. It's because of his communism. Fair point. But they don't turn around and just say, well, if a religious person is associated with racism or prejudice or sexism, that means it's coming from their religiosity. You can't do that. And so you should be comparing more conservatives to liberals, possibly. Also in this study, they found that, and unfortunately this page is sort of just wacky because it's an older thing. See if I can turn it around for you. They found that, again, Protestants are going to be the ones, not Protestants, but Christians in general, are the most anti-pornography than the non-religious. And again, pornography is harmful to women. It does not help create a more egalitarian society, in my view. It rewires men's brains to think they're objects. They should be more rough in intercourse. Horrible things from that. But again, this is an old study. I wouldn't rely on this too much unless later results sort of found that. Final study is an interesting study. Couple of issues with it, but let me pull that up here. Is this it here? Let me see if this is it. So I got so many. Yeah, this isn't on sexism. This is religious affiliation, religiosity, gender, and the rape myth acceptus, feminist theory, and rape culture. So this study is not really looking at sexism. It's looking at who is more likely to believe rape myth according to feminist theory. So you got to assume feminist theory here, and I'm going to push back on that. But let me scroll down a little bit on the paper here. So what are they asking in here? can find a better idea of this. So here's the questions they're asking here. Okay, so if a woman is raped while she is drunk, she is at least somewhat responsible for letting things get out of control. If a woman doesn't physically fight back, you can't really say it was rape. When men rape, it is because of their strong desire for sex. Although most women wouldn't admit it, they generally find being physically forced in the sex is a real turn on. Women who are caught having an illicit affair sometimes claim that it was rape. If a woman is willing to make out with a guy, there's no big deal if he goes a little further having sex. So, for example, this question, this one I just read, obviously that would be horribly wrong if a guy did that. If she sets boundaries, no, bad. You stay in those boundaries. Obviously, consent is important. I want to make sure that that is said flat out. Now, in this paper, they found that religious people, Protestant and Roman Catholic, are more likely to have rape myth acceptance than the non-religious. However, some of those questions, as you've noted, are a little oddly worded here. And I want to talk about this for a second here. So, for example, let's go back up to some of these questions. So, if a woman is raped while she is drunk, she's at least somewhat responsible for letting things get out of control. Now, I would never say yes to that because I understand the questions. They're asking about moral responsibility, but it's worded oddly. What I mean by that is I could see how someone could think this without necessarily thinking that the woman is morally responsible. For example, if I go to the bad side of town where a lot of crime happens and I fall asleep on a bench and I wake up and my wallet is gone, most people would say, "You idiot, what were you thinking?" But they wouldn't say I was morally responsible. I didn't do anything morally wrong. I just went to sleep on a bench. But I was intellectually not really acting in my best interest. I was intellectually responsible to some degree, but not morally responsible. If they caught the guy, he was prosecuted, he would suffer the crime, not me. There's a difference between intellectual responsibility and moral responsibility. We can say that the woman is not morally responsible in this, obviously, but we can still say you got to be smart. You got to make sure there's evil people out there. You got to remember that. Perry, in her book, The Case Against the Sexual Revolution, brings this idea up again. And let me pull up my slides now because she has a really good way to word this. And I just want to let her say it instead of me. So here's what she says. It's a long quote, but I think it's important to read this out. She says, in 2015, for instance, Sussex police produced posters that advise women to stick together on nights out to keep their friends safe. And invariably, these efforts invite a feminist backlash. Why? Well, the Sussex police posters were met with a petition for the removal, with the feminist authors of the petition writing that the people who have the most power to prevent rape and sexual assault from happening are not friends or bystanders, but rather the perpetrators of the crime, the rapists, which is true. Of course it is. But here's the point. Rapists don't care what feminists have to say. I sympathize with the feminist instinct to object to even the slightest suggestion of victim blaming, particularly by police. I wholeheartedly agree as well. Since police forces across the world invariably have tarnished histories, and there continue to be all sorts of problems with the criminal justice system, which is why I've spent most of my adult life campaigning to improve both the law on sexual violence and its implementations. But posters that say don't rape will prevent precisely zero rape, because rape is already illegal, and would-be rapists know that. We can scream don't rape until we're blue in the face, and it won't make a blind bit of difference. It has to be possible to say simultaneously that rape is reprehensible and that it's okay, in fact, essential to offer advice that could help to reduce its incidence. So what am I getting at here? One of the things she notes in her books is that feminist theory teaches that you are accepting rape myth. You're accepting rape myth if you do not do any intellectual responsibility. Everything should be put on the rapists. Moral, intellectual, women should be free to do whatever they want to do regardless. And in some ways, that's true. They should be free to do whatever they want in a civilized society. But we don't live in a perfect society. And what Perry is pointing out here is that there's nothing wrong with saying that we need to be intellectually responsible for ourselves to some degree. We need to be able to say, hey, rape is bad, it's immoral, and anyone who does it should be prosecuted. They're 100% morally responsible. But at the same time, we need to recognize that we need to be intellectually responsible to some degree, take responsibility for our actions. So if someone is reading one of these questionnaires and these studies and they say if someone gets drunk at a party, are they partially responsible? I could see how they could look at that and not in a moral light and just think maybe they're just intellectually responsible to some degree, but not morally responsible. So a lot of those questions are a little worded strangely. Also, the study that Zuckerman cited is a very limited study in its scope. It looked at one college campus in Georgia and only looked at one age group, basically. It's not really a good representative of religious people at large. So a lot of problems there with these studies that supposedly show more sexism among religious individuals. It depends on how you define it. If you define it purely from feminist theory, liberal feminist ideology, yeah, religious people are going to be benevolently sexist, as they say. But there's been pushback against that and arguing that the liberal outlook that says it's okay for societies to legalize prostitution, pornography, employ hookup culture, say that women should act exactly like men can cause more harmful effects to women and could be interpreted as sexist in the opposite way if you look at it from that. So there's a lot more nuance here is what I'm getting at. And to just say that religious people are more sexist is really just is ignoring a lot of the complexity and nuance there. Finally, one more thing on this issue I want to say is that Tom Holland notes that it was the Catholic Church that actually ended a lot of the old patriarchal norms in the ancient world. In the ancient world, women were perceived as property of the closest patriarch, the father, the grandfather, and they were married to whoever they wanted to. And it was the Christian church, the priests, they were pushing this idea that women have intrinsic worth and rights and equal opportunity. They should be allowed to marry whoever they want. So they started marrying people in secret. So through the idea of witnesses comes in because the patriarchs didn't believe it. So they'd have witnesses at the marriage event to prove that this couple was married. And so he gets to he's down here basically, he says, priests were authorized to join couples without knowledge of their parents or even without permission. It was consent, not coercion, that constituted the only proper foundation of marriage. The church, by pledging itself to this conviction and putting it into law, was treading on the toes of patriarchs everywhere. What's the point? It's that this idea that a lot of these secular values, again, are evidence that they are coming out of the Christian worldview here. So there's a lot more going on here with that. And I don't think this is really good evidence that you're going to be more sexist if you're religious, specifically Christian. I think it's evidence of a different worldview. And the question is, which worldview is going to benefit men and women more? And that's not been established in these papers that Zuckerman cited. All right, let me get to some super chats here because I've been ranting for a while. Uncle Tom's Cabin, which started in the Civil War, was written by Harriet Stowe, who was a devout Christian and anti-slavery. Yeah, a lot of anti-slavery movements were predominantly Christian. Contra Steven Pinker, that's just not accurate. It was predominantly Christians that were spearheading the abolitionist movement. How would you refute the argument that cognitive dissonance explains the origins of Christianity like the Millerites? I don't think it does, because that's just not in the cultural background, as scholars like N.T. Wright have shown, that the idea that there's going to be a death of the Messiah and he'll come and rise again before the general resurrection. They were looking for a conquering Messiah to defeat Rome. If they were suffering cognitive dissonance, they would have come up with something radically different than what Christianity is. New atheists always ignore racism in the Far East. Yeah, a lot of these studies do focus more on Western nations. And it'd be interesting to see more racism studies in the Far East. I think that'd be more interesting to see and how it aligns with religiosity out there. American progressives and atheists would be shocked to see how racist many non-religious Koreans, Japanese, and Chinese are of each other. Yeah, I would be interested to see some studies in that. I mean, you would know more. You live in Korea, I believe, or you're from there at least, from when we talked in the past. So yeah, the studies again. Yeah, you're right. They're only focusing more on Western nations. So that is another problem. What do you think of the RHB's models against the resurrection, reburial, mass hysteria, cognitive bias by James Fodor? I could send you articles. I'd have to look at it. I've not seen it. This is not the stream for that. Rwanda genocide was black on black racism. Yeah, but that's not racism. Well, I mean, it's tribal. It was a tribal issue. The Tutsis and I forget the other tribe. They start with an H. Porn industry equals modern day comfort women. I'm not sure what you mean, but sure. We need more context for what that's referring to. But all right, let's get back to some of this video here. So we've talked about the whole racism thing. We talked about the whole sexism thing. Not a lot of good evidence that Christians are more racist or religious people in general or more sexist. The first one on democracy is just completely wrong. A lot of that's associated with Christian values. Racism one does not show that in the meta-analysis. And the sexism thing just seems to assume a feminist or a liberal theory, and then just seems to put that out there as if that's the standard. Anyone who goes against it is sexist, and that's not a fair starting point. We got to actually establish that the feminist worldview is true, or that the liberal worldview is true, and therefore that's what's going to flow. All right, let me put my screen back up here, and we will get into the next section here.
How about if you want to talk about a major issue of moral concern, our melting planet? When it comes to the climate crisis, when it comes to global warming, whatever word you want to use, study after study shows that the more secular, the godless humans on this planet, number one, are the most likely to accept the science and empiricism explaining climate change, and are the most supportive of doing something about it at the legal level, at the political level, at the financial level. So talk about a moral crisis affecting us all, and yet the more religious people are, the least likely they are to believe in climate change and want to do anything about it.
Okay, a lot of problems here with what Zuckerman is citing here. Let me put up some of these. He put up two, and these are basically polls. So views on environmental regulations, views about environmental regulations. Okay. I remember talking about this in my video, is Christianity harmful? So stricter environmental laws and regulations cost too many jobs and hurt the economy. Stricter environmental regulations are worth the cost. Okay. If you're religious, you're more likely to say they're not worth the cost. If you're non-religious, you're more likely to say they are worth the cost. You kind of see a problem here. There's another variable in this. I could just turn this around and say, see, atheists like Zuckerman, they want to hurt the working class. They want to put all these regulations in there, and they want to hurt the working class. You see, atheists, they just don't care about the working man. And this is just evidence of that. Do you see how that's easy for me to spin this to show that atheists are not as moral as religious people? But that's not what it's saying. It's a much more nuanced question. Okay. Do you think environmental regulations are important? A lot of people might say, well, yeah, we need to protect the environment, but should we do these drastic environments if they are going to hurt jobs? No, because I want to feed my family. Like there's an issue there. You can see the different groups here. It's different from group to group. But yeah, if you're unaffiliated, you're more likely to say the environmental regulations are worth it. But he doesn't note the other thing. The other paper, let's pull this one up here. A little bit more interesting. So it does show, for example, that Hispanic Catholics and unaffiliated say the earth is warming due to human activity. So if you're a Hispanic Catholic, you're actually pretty high up there. You're even higher up there than the unaffiliated, according to this. Can I zoom in a little bit? Maybe that'll help people see more if I zoom in a little bit better. There we go. But there's also some interesting things I want to go in here. Perception of scientific consensus on climate change. Again, yeah. But there's one interesting things here. I want to get down here too. Majority of Black Protestants and unaffiliated oppose building more nuclear plants. Okay. There's a lot of good research. There's even a TED Talk I watched recently that argues that the best way to deal with climate change is nuclear energy. But who's more likely to be against nuclear energy? It's the religious, it's the unaffiliated. So you can make the case that maybe in some ways the religious are more in favor. You know, it depends. It depends on the group too. Like Black Protestants, very low. They're not in favor of nuclear. Neither are the net unaffiliated, but Catholics are more in favor of it. So are the majority of Protestants. Maybe you could make a case that actually, no, the religious are more in favor of helping the environment, since nuclear, from the research I've seen, is probably one of the best ways to tackle climate change. So again, the research is a little more nuanced than the way Zuckerman is sort of saying it. You can be in favor of helping the environment. You can be in favor of reducing climate change. Maybe you just don't think the government is the best way to go about it, because give more authoritarian power to the government, they're going to abuse it. As we know, governments don't have a pretty good track record when it comes to power. Also, two slides I want to bring up here that I think are important as well. Studies have been done on religious people in environmental things. And here's one that was done in the United States. The strength of religious identity and regularity of religious attendance appears to increase environmentally friendly consumer behavior. We can assert there is no evidence that any of our measures of religiosity intensify the negative political conservative effect. We provide evidence that the strongest negative conservative effects are found among those who are the least religious. So according to this study, if you're a conservative, you're more likely to be in favor of helping the environment and more care for the environment if you're religious. Outside of the US, so big cross-country investigation. Religion promotes pro-environmental intentions and behavior. The sample size was over 200,000 from 91 countries. Had a robust results after running 120 regression specifications. So evidence indicates religiosity doesn't lead to anti-environmental tendencies. In other words, if you want conservatives, people on the right, to be more pro-helping, more pro-environment, more in favor of caring for the environment, you should want them to be religious. You should want them to be religious, not anti-religious. So again, a lot more nuance when you get to the research here. It's not this idea that Christians are just, they hate the environment, wanted to pollute and destroy everything. It's not really what the studies are saying here. And again, when you get into the polls that Zuckerman cites, they're a little bit more nuanced. Again, I could easily spin them, say, look at atheists. They don't want to support nuclear. Nuclear is the best way to deal with climate change. They must not really care. That'd be ridiculous for me to say, but that's kind of what Zuckerman is doing in this. And that's not really fair for him to paint these studies as he is, because that's not really what they show when you go into the details here. All right, let's play some more of this.
Homophobia. Talk about a religiously birthed pox on our world. Should gay and lesbian people have equal rights? Of course. Well, if you're secular. In fact, when it comes to gay and lesbian and transgender rights, secular people, godless people, are the most supportive and accepting and empathetic, and the strongly religious are the least.
All right, let's talk a little bit about this. For one thing, I'll give him that. Yeah, I would expect that to be the case. I'm in favor of gays and lesbians having equal rights in societies, but I'm also in favor of Christians having rights to practice their religion. And if a priest or a reverend or a pastor doesn't want to marry a gay couple, he should have that right too. But often that's sort of interpreted as religious prejudice because they have a religious conviction on something. That's kind of ridiculous. Let's go back to my slides here, because there's a couple of slides I want to look at. The other important thing to note is this is not really coming from religiosity. Research has shown this. So here's two studies that sort of make the case that this isn't really coming from religiosity, but right-wing authoritarianism. Another study was done in Brazil, and what they found is the factor of traditionalism fully mediated the path connecting religiosity and prejudice towards sexual and gender diversity. That is, it has not only reduced the magnitude of the association from 0.3 to negative 0.23. They say it is not religiosity itself or the degree of religious practice that motivates prejudice, but rather the degree of adherence to traditional values. In other words, once these other beliefs are accounted for, religiosity negatively correlated with LGBTQ prejudice. So it's not this idea that religiosity leads to prejudice against gay people. It's coming from other factors like right-wing authoritarianism, traditionalism. And when we single out other beliefs, this study did that. Let's see, is this the right paper? Yeah. They note in this paper, as far as religious affiliation is concerned, it is negatively correlated with LGBTQ legislation in countries with Islamic majority, but positively correlated in countries with a Christian majority, although very weakly. Regarding the main setbacks for the promotion of LGBT plus rights, the empirical results suggest that religious affiliation can act as a cultural constraint in countries where Islamism, Hinduism, and Buddhism are the most followed religions. Contrarily, religious affiliation does not seem to be constraining LGBT plus legislation in Christian majority countries. So it doesn't seem Christianity leads to prejudice against gay people, the denial of equal rights. These seem to be coming from other factors. So again, the actual research is a little bit more nuanced. It's not this idea as simplistic as Zuckerman is making it out to be. Christians, again, have promoted human rights around the world in multiple ways, and Christian nations produce equal rights in multiple ways. I don't think it's fair to say, to sort of just take these general polls, these bivariate analyses, and derive sweeping conclusions from that. When we get to the research, it's a little bit more complex. All right, I'm going to play some more of this, and I'll get to some super chats in a bit.
Death penalty. Talk about compassion. Talk about mercy. I always grew up believing that mercy was one of Christianity's greatest values. And people always talk about Allah the Merciful in Islam. Yet, what do we find? When it comes to the death penalty, secular people are far more opposed to it. And the strongly God-believing and the strongly Muslim, strongly Christian are the most supportive of the death penalty. Pretty ironic if you think about it.
No. Okay, again, this is just an example of just assuming a left-wing idea or an ideology is superior to a right-wing one. And we atheists agree with that more, therefore they're morally superior. There are strong philosophical cases that can be made for the death penalty. For one, this is just ignoring the plurality of virtue. Mercy is a virtue, so is justice. It's not good to be entirely merciful and lack any justice. You got to find the good middle ground, and that's where the debate is. If we had a country that didn't have any laws because they didn't want to punish anyone, and there were excuses, well, we believe in mercy, that would cause a lot of harm because evil people would take advantage of that, would they not? Sometimes justice is necessary, and death penalty has been argued by some philosophers to be a big deterrent of crime. And not having a death penalty leads to certain people thinking they can just get away with murder and then just live out the rest of their life in a government cell being fed by the government kind of thing. I'm not saying that they're right. I'm saying that there is a case that can be made for the death penalty. But this is not a religious thing. This is a conservative versus a liberal debate. And conservatives are more likely to be in favor of the death penalty, and liberals are not. That's where the debate is. Saying that this is also tied to religiosity is not really looking at the nuance here. Kenneth Vaughn, for example, is coming out with research later this summer that's going to point out that a lot of, when you go beyond the US, you look more at a global scale, Christians are more divided on left-right politics. It's not as clear-cut that they're always right-wing like they are in this country. In this country, we have a strong white evangelical population, which skews the data. But beyond this country, in a lot of other countries, the divide among Christians is a lot more split on left-right-wing politics. And Kenneth Vaughn is coming out with research on that later this summer. So I don't have it now. But to just sort of say, oh, yeah, conservatives are in favor of death penalty and conservatives tend to be more religious, it's a correlation issue. That's not how this follows. And again, there's also the issue of assuming your political ideology is already correct and already true and already more moral without looking at the nuance and the philosophy behind some of the other views.
How about when it comes to immigrants and refugees? Ought we care for people who are fleeing persecution, fleeing war, fleeing poverty?
Yes.
Again, you would think that the religious would be the most welcoming.
Yes.
Not what we find in study after study all around the world. The less religious a person is, the more likely they are willing to open the doors to the immigrants and the refugees. And the more religious, the more restrictive they want to be.
That's just wrong. Citing some bivariate means comparisons is not good enough. We got to look at some actual data here. So let's pull up some actual data here. Going back to my slides, because I like my slides. All right. This was a study done in Europe. They said, our findings indicate that although more secularized countries are on average more tolerant towards Muslims and Islam, strongest anti-Muslim attitudes are nonetheless found among the non-religious in these countries. Kenneth Vaughn, great guy. Here's a study he did a few years ago. At the individual level, Christians, with the exception of Catholic Christians and the unaffiliated, are relatively similar in their policy preferences regarding the admittance of refugees. Religious service attendance is associated with more generous policy preferences. At the national and regional level, percent unaffiliated is associated with more restrictive policies. Greater religiosity was linked to support for inclusive immigration policy. Another paper. We find somewhat more human compassion for asylum seekers living in ACSs among frequent church attendants, just as we hypothesized. Religiosity at the community level has been associated with personal altruism towards strangers and refugees. Okay, there's 5 studies here. And these are studies. These are not bivariate means comparisons, just looking at poll data. These are studies. They're finding that religiosity is associated with more welcoming immigration policies, more willing to help those that are different from you, refugees. And if you want, in the video description below, in my playlist on the benefits of Christianity, if you check out my video, Is Christianity Harmful? That's where this slide is from. Or my video, Does Christianity Cause Christian Nationalism? Give even more papers to support that. It's not this idea of religiosity leads away from helping immigrants. It tends to lead to helping immigrants. I mean, I know churches here in Tucson that go out and they leave water out in the desert for people jumping the border. They may not agree with illegal immigration, but they want the people not to die of dehydration. It's churches that are doing that. So that's, again, there's a lot of pushback on that. It's not as clear cut as Zuckerman is making it out. The research tends to show religiosity is associated with help for immigrants. All right, let me get to some super chats here before I get behind. See, did I do this one yet? Yeah, I did that one. Let's do this one here. Have you seen any research on the effects of Mormonism has on a society individuals? So here's the thing about Mormonism. From a theological perspective, I cannot consider Mormons Christians. However, from a sociological perspective, they are lumped together in with Christians just because it's a similar culture. It's hard to deny that. So they tend to have a lot of the same effects we see in these studies with Christians in general. A lot of the similar results. So Mormons tend to be included as Christians in sociological research. And I understand that because they're a similar culture. So yeah, Mormonism tends to be quite beneficial for the same reasons Christianity is. It's a similar culture, use a lot of similar ideas. I mean, you just go through the studies. A lot of the studies I use, you can use that as well. I'm pretty sure you're a Mormon, if I remember correctly. Is that right, Jacob? But yeah, I mean, I think Mormonism is not associated with any negative, especially since they don't really practice polygamy anymore. LDS that still practices polygamy is incredibly harmful. Any society that practices polygamy is harmful. But yeah, a lot of the similar results with Mormonism in these, because they're just sort of sampled in as Christians. They have to from a sociological perspective. And let me get to the next one here. This professor is from Claremont College. Do you know Professor Mary Poppin? She converted to Christianity. Interesting person. I do not, but I'll check that out. Sounds interesting. Got any suggestions for books that argue that Christianity has a negative effect on society? I mean, Steven Pinker tries to make that case. There are various researchers that have tried to make that case. They're not good because they're not based on the most robust data out there, to be honest. Trying to think of other ones. I mean, just if you go back and maybe to some writers in the 1920s as well. Names are escaping me, unfortunately, but I know some have. Go back to ideas that were promoting things like the conflict thesis, books by Steven Pinker as well. He did, that kind of stuff. New Atheist. So here's the one that just came to mind. Christopher Hitchens' book, God is Not Great. There's one. Horrible book. See Nathan Johnstone's reply in his book, The New Atheism. Really tears it apart. Sam Harris has some books. Hector Avalos has some books on that kind of stuff. Not very convincing. And the data a lot of the data I use in the playlist link below in the video description really debunks a lot of that nonsense. These progressives overlook the fact that the Communist Party of China, an atheist group, did not look at the LGBT favorably. Yeah, that's a good point. And it's the Christian societies that secularism comes out of that has really helped promote a lot of LGBTQ equal rights movements. The idea they should be treated equal. And so, again, read Tom Holland's book. Read the book Christianity and Human Rights, an introduction. A lot of this stuff comes out of Christian worldview. Do you know who Paula G. Alive is? Can you watch his video about minimal facts about the resurrection of Jesus? I've never heard of Paula G. What are you talking about, Crazy Fast? That doesn't sound familiar at all. Yeah, I know. We've already done live streams on Paul. Maybe I'll do some more in the future. I don't know. Ironic, people in favor of abolishing capital punishment want some people they personally hate dead. I mean, yeah, it's unfortunate there are some people sort of like that. I don't think Zuckerman is one of those guys. And I think a lot of that's just more rhetoric than actual following through on that kind of stuff. There's a lot of rhetoric in politics. All right, let's see what more we got in this video, and then we will get to some more super chats later. So you guys can put more super chats in, which I do appreciate. It helps fund the channel, keeps me afloat. So please put in more super chats, and I will go through them for you, and you will help keep me fully funded.
Women's bodily autonomy. You know the deal there. Atheists, agnostics, and humanists are the most supportive of women having control over their own bodies and their own reproductive systems. The religious are the most against it.
Yeah, there we got a huge problem. I'm not going to apologize for being pro-life. And I know most of you guys watching this are not going to apologize for that. And it's the way he phrases it is just so uncharitable to Christians. It absolutely is. We don't want women to not have bodily autonomy. We just don't think a fetus is part of your body. That's another human soul. That's another human person. You just can't say that it's all about bodily autonomy. There's a much more complex issue here. And yeah, I would say it's actually good to be pro-life, and Christians are more pro-life. Therefore, I'm going to say that Christians are more moral in this situation. Zuckerman's going to disagree. But do you see how just assuming a certain underlying value is already true somehow makes you better? A lot of what Zuckerman is doing in this video is just doing it. He's assuming his worldview. He's assuming his values are superior. And this is evidence that the non-religious are more religious than Christians and religious people in general.
How about just hitting kids? We've got data on that. You
guys are gonna love this one.
More likely to beat their kids and support corporal punishment? The strongly religious. Who's most likely to oppose it? The strongly secular. How about guns?
Before we get to guns, okay. Let's just say that was not really representing the data accurately. I'll just go to my slides because I addressed these very studies when Zuckerman brought them up in an article. I addressed them in my video. Is Christianity harmful? It's the exact same thing. So first study he brings up, individual and county level regional participation. Okay. It only surveyed 3,000 parents of children aged 12 and younger from 50 mid-sized California cities. Do you guys think California mid-sized cities is representative of Christians at large? Yeah, no, it's not. Parents who attend religious groups use corporal punishment more frequently than parents who did not use religious groups. Now, corporal punishment, is that spanking? Is that hitting with a belt? But the way Zuckerman phrased it is like you get this idea that Christians are just hitting their kids with like fists or something. That's not what this study is saying. This study is not saying that Christian kids are abused more than non-religious. It says those who lived in counties with greater rates of religious participation use corporal punishment less frequently than those living in counties with lower rates of religious participation. Okay. Well, it also found that greater religious participation resulted in less corporal punishment. There were no effects on religious participation on physical abuse at the individual or county level. Zuckerman is taking this study wildly out of context and using it as a battering ram against religious. This is not accurate of what the paper says. I've read this multiple times because I read it when I was doing my research for my video, Is Christianity Harmful? I read it again before this. I don't know what he's getting at. This is just, I don't know any other way to say it. This is just not being honest about what the research shows. And I'm kind of disappointed. The other one is an older study. It only looked at like religious fundamentalists. So there's a positive association should be mediated by three aspects: religious ideology, biblical literalism. It only looked about certain people. Again, it's a very outdated study. I addressed this one in more detail in my video, Is Christianity Harmful? But again, this is just not supported, especially this paper. It's not supported by what he's arguing here. And the other one didn't look at Christians at large. It just looked at a specific group like Protestant fundamentalists. So no, the data does not show you're more likely to beat your kids if you're religious. That's taking this research wildly out of context. And I'm quite ashamed of that Zuckerman did that. Unless I'm missing something, he is not being fair or honest with what that data shows. And then he has the audacity to say this is just evidence you beat your kids. I mean, could you imagine if I was using a paper like that to say atheists are more likely to beat their kids? There'd be live streams on every atheist channel for months about how this stupid Christian apologist doesn't know what he's talking about. And honestly, rightly so. But I mean, you go to the comment section of that, not a lot of people doing some fact checking on this kind of stuff, which was quite disheartening.
Guns. Who is most supportive of, everybody having semi-automatic weapons? Let teenagers have guns. The more religious. Whereas the more secular take a more sane and humanitarian approach to gun safety.
In the US. It's a lot different outside of the US, ladies and gentlemen. And again, that's a political issue. To tie this to religiosity is not fair. It just tends to be more religious people in this country are conservative, and then they take in conservative factors when associating the gun thing. It doesn't come from their religious convictions.
Even animal rights. How should we treat other sentient living beings on this planet? Same pattern holds. The more religious are the least supportive of humane animal rights, and the more secular are the most. I could keep
real quick. I'm not going to spend too much time on the animal rights thing because that's very, very complicated. I don't have all the facts on this. But this paper, I was a little disappointed in when I read through this. For one thing, I just want to get down to the questions here. Let's go here. Where are those questions? Okay, so this is what they're using to find out if you're more likely to support animal rights or not. It's wrong to wear leather jackets and pants. Really? Most medical research done on animals is unnecessary and invalid. I don't think most Christians know. I don't think most people in general know how to answer that properly. I think most of the answers the Christians are going to say on that, and people in general are going to be like, well, scientists use animals. I trust scientists. Shouldn't we trust what the scientists are doing? Like, isn't that what atheists have been telling me for years? Trust the science. My answer on the medical research thing is scientists know more about this than I do. They're using animals. I'm going to trust the scientists. But apparently it shows you don't support animal rights. The other one, I've seriously considered becoming vegetarian in an effort to save animal lives. Okay. That brings in all sorts of political issues, nutritional issues. I'm not convinced personally that the vegetarian lifestyle is as healthy as one that includes meat. But again, I'm not an expert on that for sure. But I think that's not necessarily coming from, I hate animals. And again, this fourth one, God put animals on earth for man to use. Okay, now you're just basically putting a questionnaire to guarantee that religious people will be anti-animal rights. Because yeah, you can believe that God put animals on here for us to use, and it's actually been quite beneficial in building civilized societies and making the world a better place. You know, using horses in the old time or using cows and using farming animals has been incredibly beneficial for making a better world. This is a very loaded study, a lot of implications from it, a lot of not well supported. I don't think that's a very good measure to use to see who's more moral for a number of reasons. Okay, so I addressed that one. Ironic people in favor of abolishing oh yeah, I've already did this one. Let me do this one here. What is the probability of the position P that inspiring philosophy is based? It's 100% probable, sir, obviously. There are many non-religious, abusive, toxic households, and they are everywhere. Absolutely. And there's no evidence that religiosity is going to lead to that kind of stuff. Again, see my video, Is Christianity Harmful? Christianity leads to more self-control, less aggression, less crime, less delinquency, more pro-social behavior, more agreeableness, conscientiousness, extroversion. It's all in the video link below in the playlist. Is Christianity harmful? We could also spin the death penalty stats by saying that atheists are okay with convicts that have no remorse, living off hardworking American incomes. Exactly, Nicholas. That's a really good way to put that. It's very easy to take what these polls or studies are saying and spin them in your direction to make it seem like you and your tribe are more moral. We have a word for that. It's propaganda. And this is not a good way to show that that non-religious are more moral than religious. If Zuckerman was just arguing, hey, non-religious people can be moral, I would not have cared to do a live stream on this. But the fact that he has got the audacity to take this, use these studies out of context, spin them to sort of make this claim, that's not fair, and that's kind of dishonest the way it looks right now, unless I'm missing something. All right, let me put my screen back up here so we can see some more in this video, because there's still some more stuff he says I want to address.
Keep going. But you should by now see the pattern is clear. The averages are clear. The correlations are clear. So why the difference? How do we explain this?
Well, we explain it because you've been spinning studies. That's how we explain it, sir.
There's many factors involved. There's not going to be one thing.
Many factors, yes. Many factors of quote mining, misarticulating, all sorts of factors.
But what my research has shown, and others as well, is that how do you ground your morality? For many religious people, certainly not all, for many religious people, Their moral system is grounded in obedience, following rules, obeying some external authority, either imagined or real. Secular people don't approach things that way. What guides them? Compassion, empathy.
Yes, folks, that's right. Religious people are not guided by compassion or empathy. We just follow what the authority tells us, and it's those secular people that are just about compassion. Wow, that's insulting. That is so insulting, demeaning, and rude. And I can't believe he even said that. That is, imagine if I got up here and said, the only reason atheists do good things is because they're afraid to go to jail, whereas religious people are just very compassionate and they're just guided by empathy. And because the love that Christ pours on us, we can pour out on others. That's the reason would atheists be up in arms? Maybe a little. Yes, very much so. That's a ridiculous false dichotomy. Secularists can be guided by, can do moral things because of empathy and compassion, but also because of authority, fear of the law, fear of peers. Same with Christians. Same thing. It's not this either or. And I think it's time for me to put some more slides up because you guys know I do that a lot. Okay. Let me scroll down here. Okay. So are religious people not guided by empathy? Well, according to this meta-analytical review, their religious people are associated with more extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and low measures on neuroticism. If you're mature in your religion, you have even higher measures. Religious fundamentalism is low, and extrinsic religiosity is, of course, low as well. And again, extrinsic religiosity, you can be an atheist and be extrinsically religious. But if you're intrinsically religious, it's the top one up here, you apparently have strong measures of agreeableness, conscientiousness, extroversion, prosocial behavior, basically. Priming study. We found clear support for religious priming in samples drawn from populations culturally shaped by highly influential prosocial religious traditions of the Abrahamic faiths, comprising a majority of the world's population, where we would expect religious concepts to influence prosocial behavior. So religiosity, when people are primed with religious aspects, they become more ethical, more empathetic. They display prosocial behavior. Religiosity corresponds with lower levels of direct and indirect aggression. Intrinsic religiosity facilitates an increase in self-control. Greater religiosity was associated with higher levels of compassion and self-control. Gee, it really seems like religiosity makes people more compassionate, not that they just are afraid of authority. Kind of interesting. Also, as you guys know, I just did a video, how Christianity changed the world. Here are many of the studies I cited. We see that Protestants and Catholic missionaries went around the world, places outside of their governmental authority, built missions and churches and schools and hospitals and created economic growth and fought for colonial reform and punished colonial abusers and did all sorts of great things for people out of compassion. They didn't do this because they felt like they had to. They did it out of the goodness of their heart. They could have just stayed in their safe Christian countries and never gone out. But they went out because they were compassionate, because they wanted to fulfill the Great Commission and bring more people to Christ. And so they built more hospitals. They spread more education around the world. Come on, it's pretty clear religious people are compassionate. We don't just operate from a place of authority. This is quite a ridiculous straw man from Zuckerman to make this false dichotomy. I would never want to say that about atheists. And if I do, I apologize. They don't just operate from fear of authority. Also, he wants to say that atheists are more moral in multiple ways. Well, let's look at some other research that pushes back on that a little bit. So this was a paper on prejudice found among atheists. It says atheists in particular went further by even expressing consistently across 3 countries. So a lot bigger than the sample sizes he was using in some of his studies that he cited. Less positive attitudes towards the exotic, distant religious outgroups, Buddhists, usually perceived positively in European societies compared to the exotic ethnic outgroup Chinese. This was in terms of an unwillingness to have anti-liberal and religionists as political representatives or as a husband or wife. which could possibly be explained as a reflection of a value conflict if religion is perceived to threaten the secular ideals of European societies. But this prejudice also included unwillingness to have anti-liberals and religionists as even neighbors. The latter indeed constitutes a strong indicator of discriminatory prejudice. So in this study, they found evidence that atheists, Gnostics, didn't even want to have people who are religious as even neighbors, which is evidence of discriminatory prejudice. Another paper, atheists reported the coldest feelings towards Christian targets. The spiritual but not religious reported the warmest feelings, and agnostics fell in the middle. As expected, participants who identified as atheists showed greater belief superiority and dogmatism than both agnostic and spiritual but not religious participants. Our results show that among the non-religious, feelings of distrust in Christians' moral and intellectual judgment, as well as fear of contamination by Christian views or ideas, motivated prejudice towards Christians above and beyond perceived symbolic and realistic threats. Other studies have found similar results. What's the point? We can see negative immoral attitudes among atheists. That doesn't mean not being religious or atheist causes this. It could be due to other factors. But using Zuckerman's own standard, I could basically just say, yeah, there's evidence here that religious people are more moral. I could come out here and say, I just got all these studies, guys, that, when it comes to tribalism, prejudice, discrimination, atheists are scoring lower than Christians. But that'd be a kind of a leap in logic from this, because these are just correlative. We need to be very careful with how we use this kind of stuff. But nonetheless, that's what these results show. So for Zuckerman to say that it just shows that atheists are less racist, all the research shows this, they're less prejudiced, not exactly coming up in the data that I was able to find. See, did I have another slide I want to show? No, I want to get back to the video here because I want to finish this out. And then we will do some super chats here. There's another interesting little nugget of wisdom I want to put in here.
Do these actions cause suffering or do they alleviate suffering? It's as simple as that. And it's interesting because both religious worldviews and secular worldviews tell a story about humanity and how we're related to each other. From the religious worldview, whether it's Jewish, Muslim, Christian, the notion is that there's a Father God and we are all this God's children, and hence we ought to love each other. It's a nice story. From the secular viewpoint, it's called Darwinian evolution. We all descend from common biological ancestors. We are all primates descended from common primate ancestors. So in that sense, we're brothers and sisters genetically, not in some spiritual sense, but in reality, in our genes, in our genetics, we are one species. So what's interesting is,
anyone see a problem with what he just said? Anyone? Like, you do realize Christians also believe we're all genetically brothers and sisters, right? It's not just secular humanists. You guys got that idea from us. Sorry, but that's a fact, and I'll show you in a minute here. But yeah, that's just a huge straw man of what Christians believe. Yeah, we believe we can be spiritual brothers and sisters, but we're all in Adamic unity is what the term is. So we're descended from Adam. That's the idea. And actually, in the past, some various evolutionary ideas have led to racism that Darwin actually was pushing against. There was the idea that maybe some of the other races are actually less than the white Europeans, which was ridiculous. But yeah, that's just not accurate here. And let me just put up one more slide here I want to show, which I think is important. There's a great book on Darwin called Darwin's Sacred Cause. They say Adamic unity and the brotherhood of man was axiomatic in the anti-slavery texts that he and his family devoured and distributed. It implied a single origin for black and white, a shared ancestry. And this was the unique feature of Darwin's particular brand of evolution. Life itself was made up of countless trillions of siblings, common descent, not only black and white, but among all races and species through all time, all joined up in bloodlines back to a common ancestor. They make the case that Darwin's idea of common ancestry came from Christian teachings in the abolitionist movement, the idea of Adamic unity. So where did secular humanists get this idea about everyone was all being brothers and sisters? Their Christian background. The same thing Tom Holland argues in Dominion. The same thing they argue in Christianity and Human Rights and Introduction. For Zuckerman to sort of make this distinction in his argument that Christians don't hold to this idea that Darwin got from Christians just shows a very poor understanding of the history of where these ideas come from and how they evolved. No pun intended. But yeah, that was just, again, another obvious straw man of what Christians and religious people believe. Another obvious slap in the face against religious people. Just, and it's ironic. He's trying to show they're more religious, and the way he's sort of presenting this case is coming across as quite rude, immoral, and just attacking religious people in all sorts of ridiculous ways, to be honest. Let me close this out. I got one more section I want to play, and then we're going to stop.
How do these two stories play out? What you actually find is the religious notion that we're all brothers and sisters doesn't work so well.
False. It works incredibly well, according to the data. See my playlist below and see the data I've cited here.
In fact, religious people tend to be more ethnocentric.
False. We already showed that's false.
More tribalistic.
That's false. You can see the studies I just cited.
More xenophobic.
False.
And more in-group, out-group focus.
False.
Whereas secular people who accept Darwinian evolution tend to be more open to the unity of our species, our connection to other species, and that plays out in the real world, so that what you actually get is more compassion, more empathy, and more just systems on planet Earth that are grounded in secular morals as they live out in the world today and manifest in the world today.
Okay, once again, ladies and gentlemen, that is just false. Again, we can make a case, as we've done here, based on these papers I put out here, that atheists can show discriminatory prejudice, can have cold feelings towards Christians, prejudice towards them, can have look at them as if they're like an intellectual or moral threat. I mean, like, you also should read the book I cited in the beginning. This book here, he goes into this in the last chapter, and he notes that a lot of the new atheists tend to have this form of fundamentalism that manifested in places like the USSR, where they just sort of discriminated against religious people because they, on belief basis, and really just were horrible. It did not manifest in the way Zuckerman was talking about. And again, Nathan Johnstone is not a Christian by any stretch of the imagination. He doesn't believe in God, but he points out that a lot of those same issues can come out of secularism quite easily. And again, you can cite a lot of the research I showed that I also, in my playlist link below, shows that Christianity leads to incredibly moral aspects. It's not the way that he is representing the data, and this just is not supported. So again, I was kind of blown away by how dishonest this came across, how much of a slap in the face this was. You're literally going on. You're literally going on about how moral you think you are, and you're doing it in one of the most immoral ways possible, like misrepresenting the data, jumping to conclusions, twisting things to support your worldview, not representing the poll data accurately. It's just, wow. I was blown away by how incredibly ridiculous that was. And at the end of the day, it's very immoral to say we're more moral than you, unless that's like an actual and objective fact. Like that's not what humble, moral people do. If you're a virtuous person, you don't come out and say, yes, I'm just better than the rest of you, and let me return to my ivory tower where I belong. The moral thing to do is to say, let me be humble about this. And that's a Christian virtue. What is the Christian virtue? Forgive me, Lord, I am a sinner. I am the worst of sinners. I'm a wretch. Please help me. How do I make this world better? How do I make myself better? That's a humbling aspect in Christianity, and allows us to, I hope, not act like that, because we should not be going around making videos about how we think we're more moral than other people. I try to make videos not on that, but showing how Christianity benefits the world. Not necessarily that we're just better people, because I don't think Christians necessarily are better people. So I don't know. It's maybe I'm wrong. I will admit I'm wrong. I could very well be wrong on this, but it just seems very immoral to make a video like that. And it just makes the whole video ironic. But that was my whole impression. And that's mainly why I wanted to respond to that. So I hope you found that helpful. Some of the research I used. I think a great book would be, for a lot of people to check out, is The Case Against the Sexual Revolution. I found that book very insightful and very eye-opening in a lot of ways. I think a lot of people should read that, especially if you're of the liberal, secular, feminist worldview. She pushes back on a lot of that stuff. And she's coming out of that worldview. She's pushing back by coming out of that worldview. If moral statements are emotional reactions, then why can't epistemic claims also be emotional reactions, critiquing non-cognitivism? Yeah, that'd be an issue for meta-ethics specifically, not necessarily, I think, what we're talking about here, but it'd be more of an issue for meta-ethics. Women should not be forced to play against males. Yeah, I agree with you, Slam. And you're a woman, you would know. I don't think that's fair at all. I think that leads to inequality. Actually, I don't think that leads to more equality. I think that leads to women's spaces being invaded by biological males, and they end up getting hurt and not being able to compete fairly. What Zuckerman seems to want to say is religious people are Nazis, which appears to have been a very common rhetoric. Always, God bless IP. I hope he's not saying that. Let's be honest. I really hope he's not saying that. Mindshift did a counter to one of your videos, and he often twists writings and misrepresents data, though on commenting on some of his thoughts on commenting on some of his vids. I'll take a look at what he's done. Maybe we could do a stream on that in May at some point. Often twists writings and misrepresents data. I mean, I did see one where he tries to argue that Christianity creates a slave morality, and I'm just over here going, this is just armchair psychology, and it's really just contradicted by a lot of research out there. Darwinism makes us brothers and sisters. Clearly, he has never heard of eugenics or Nazism. Yeah. I mean, but that was not just out of evolution. That was out of a specific Nietzschean idea it was more than just evolution, to be honest. I mean, I think you can have a very egalitarian understanding and believe in evolution and not. But I mean, yeah, things like that can become corrupted easily. Just for fun, here's a challenge if you'd like. If I donate another $5, if you can name 7 heresies within Gnosticism within 30 seconds. Okay, Basilidians, the Sethites, the Cainites, the Valentinians, the Marcionites. I got 5. That's all I can really think of off the top of my head. Did I get a Valentin? Yeah, Valentin. The Barbarites, I believe, is another one. I'm trying to think. What was that late one? Oh, no, that's 6. The best I can do. So maybe donate $4. Thank you again for the generous super chat, Silver Pesos. Always appreciate you donating to the channel like this. Very much appreciated. All right. With that, I'm going to close out here in a little bit here. Just final thoughts. A good lesson in this. If an atheist brings up a study, or if anyone brings up a study, check the source. Don't just go, oh, okay. Check it, read it over, verify it, see if there's any other research out there. Like the one on racism, why we don't practice what we preach, that meta-analysis. It doesn't actually support Zuckerman's conclusion. And I've emailed the study authors on this because I want to verify that I'm on the right page when it comes to that paper. I don't see the data really supporting it. So there's that. 6 is enough. Have a good day. Appreciate it. Yeah, the best I can do off the top of my head. But yeah. All right. Appreciate everyone for coming across all 3 platforms. We got about 1,000 people watching, so much appreciated for that. I should be back next week. I'll do another stream eventually. I'll take a look at some other stuff. But yeah, at the end of the day, there's not a lot of good evidence that the non-religious are more moral than Christians or religious people in general. The data is more nuanced, and I think it's going to depend on the individual. But we do have an enormous amount of data that Christianity does make people better, more moral. It makes society better, makes the world better, and it has historically done that. And they just sort of cherry pick the studies like this, or the poll data, is not a good way to go about this kind of stuff. So, all right, everyone, I'll see you guys next time, and I will be back on my channel next week with another stream.